Wine, women, and song. I mean, what else is there to say about me? I love to sing and I love women. Wine, I'm not too crazy about wine.
The greatest comedy partnership in American history ended with just 10 words. Behind sold-out shows and millions of laughs, a silent fracture was growing, one so deep it would quietly sever one of entertainment's most legendary duos. Dean Martin saw it long before the world did and spoke a truth that cut sharper than any headline. Imagine performing night after night with someone who no longer sees you, not as a partner, but as just a dollar sign. What happens when the spotlight illuminates one man so brightly that the other fades into the shadows? The words that ended it. On the set of Hollywood or Bust, after a long day of filming and rehearsals, an exchange took place that echoed far beyond the soundstage. Jerry Lewis publicly corrected Dean Martin's delivery of a line in front of the entire crew. It was a moment that underscored the imbalance of their relationship, a man once equal reduced to being ordered around. After the take, Dean found Jerry privately and spoke words he had been building toward for 2 years. "You're nothing to me but a dollar sign." Those 10 words were not a tirade, nor a dramatic speech. They were a clear, cold observation delivered with quiet finality. Dean Martin had watched the growing distance and diminishing respect, understood his role had shifted from partner to commodity. He wasn't accusing Jerry with anger, he was stating a truth that finally needed to be named. For Dean, the partnership had become a transactional relationship, valued not for loyalty or friendship, but for financial gain. Jerry Lewis's memoir recounts the moment with a precision born of its weight. The usually effervescent entertainer fell silent, his trademark smile fading as the impact settled. In that silence, an unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. The partnership that had defined an era was over. Yet, there was no harsh confrontation or bitterness exchanged, only the quiet acceptance of a painful reality. This private conversation kind of became the final turning point for two men who spent a decade building one of entertainment's most iconic duos. That day, it marked the rupture between public performance and personal truth, between shared dreams and individual survival, really. After the exchange, they finished the film, handled the promotional duties, and delivered their last live show at the Copacabana on July 25, 1956. The crowd at that last performance gave them a standing ovation. Some were moved to tears, while others stayed unaware of the estrangement hiding under the polished act. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis left the stage through separate doors, like this quiet symbol of how their emotional and professional split sat right there. For 20 years afterward, the two simply did not speak, and they sealed the parting with long silence. Dean Martin picked silence instead of turning it into a public spectacle or some kind of recrimination. He never chased revenge, and he didn't transform the partnership into a loud public feud either. Instead, he just moved forward, building a career on his own terms and answering to no one else's expectations. Martin's method, in a way, contrasted sharply with Jerry Lewis, who tried to explain and justify himself through interviews, memoirs, and films for decades. And what makes Dean's 10 words feel even more remarkable is how little he said publicly after that. There was no long explanation, no media storm, nothing really, just this elegant, final truth, softly said but deeply felt. It was the truth of a man who understood his worth beyond the spotlight and refused to be reduced to a symbol, or worse, a paycheck. Dean Martin believed it after a decade, and those words echoed through the lives that followed, marking not just an end, but a profound reckoning in the history of American entertainment. The rise of Martin and Lewis. Two men, one stage, and a chemistry so electric it transformed American entertainment. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were more than a comedy duo. They were a sensation. From their accidental meeting in Atlantic City in 1946 to stardom that seemed to come overnight, their act took the nation by storm. In 8 short years, they became the most popular entertainment team in the country, headlining lucrative nightclub residencies, starring in a string of hit films, and dominating radio and television. Their combination of smooth vocals and wild physical comedy was unprecedented and irresistible. Dean Martin, the laid-back singer with a natural charm, brought an effortless cool that balanced Jerry Lewis's frenetic, unpredictable energy. Martin's Ohio roots and Italian-American background gave him a grounded presence. He was the voice that made audiences relax, while Lewis was the chaotic force that kept them laughing uncontrollably. Together, they created a dynamic that felt spontaneous but was carefully honed, inching ahead, faster than most acts could imagine possible. From radio deals paying $15,000 a week to Paramount films grossing $20 million each, their success was staggering. Their appeal wasn't just fame or financial success, it was the authentic sense of joy they brought to their performances. Every show felt like a unique experience, a collaboration where 2 very different talents complemented each other perfectly. Women threw hotel room keys. Tickets sold out before dates were announced. Fans lined up to see them, and the press couldn't get enough. Magazines featured their smiling faces on covers, making them household names in every corner of America. Yet beneath that roaring success, cracks had already begun to form. What the audience saw, the laughter, the seamless performances, belied the complexities of a partnership struggling with invisible tensions. Behind the curtain, things were less harmonious. Fame created a spotlight, but it also threw sharp shadows. Between takes and public appearances, 2 very different visions of the act and its future were quietly competing, sowing seeds of friction that would grow over time. The essence of any great comedy duo is balance. Someone carries the weight, and someone gets the applause. Sometimes those roles shift, and sometimes one person's voice eclipses the other. For Martin and Lewis, the balance initially felt even, but as the spotlight grew, the scales started to tip. The phrase "Jerry Lewis and his singer" began appearing in reviews and headlines more frequently. This slight shift in public perception drove a wedge unseen by fans, but impossible for Martin to ignore. Their meteoric rise didn't just change their lives, it reshaped the entertainment world. They defined an era, influencing countless performers and setting new standards for success in live performance and on screen. But the intense pace and public scrutiny strained more than just their schedules. It challenged the foundation of their partnership itself. When success accelerates at this speed, the cost is always larger than the applause. Even as their joint accomplishments mounted, the question lingered. Could a partnership built on such different personalities survive the pressure of fame and creative control? Their story was destined to test the limits of friendship and artistry. The early years had been magical, but the journey ahead would reveal truths that neither man could fully face until it was too late. Jerry Lewis's growing dominance wasn't just artistic ambition. It was a force that began shifting the entire act's dynamic, often at Dean's expense. The creative divide emerges. Jerry Lewis was always more than the physical comedian with the floppy expressions and zany antics. From early on, he took charge of the act's structure, pacing, and creative direction. As their fame exploded, Lewis's role morphed from partner to primary creative force, a shift that unsettled the original balance. His vision began to shape not only their stage performances, but also their films, down to every frame and camera movement. Directors found it easier to work around his opinions than to challenge him. This growing control extended beyond artistry into people. In early 1954, Lewis fired their head writers, Ed Simmons and Norman Lear, two young talents tasked with writing material to highlight both performers equally. These men protected Dean's presence in the act, ensuring he had sharp moments and a real voice. Yet Lewis made this decision alone, without informing Dean or consulting anyone else. That unilateral move removed a crucial buffer for Dean's creative influence, signaling a widening rift. Lewis's behavior in making decisions behind Dean's back wasn't just a creative choice. It reflected a shift in power and respect within the duo. It was the day the scales tipped visibly. Dean became excluded from decisions that shaped their public image and private work. While Lewis pushed forward with his creative control, Dean was left to absorb the consequences, watching quietly as his space in the act contracted. The erosion of collaboration marked a turning point not only for their careers, but also for their relationship. As Lewis's ambitions expanded, Martin's role was increasingly relegated to support, his smooth confidence barely enough to keep pace. The shift wasn't sudden, but manifested subtly, almost imperceptible to audiences dazzled by their performances. Behind the smiles and laughter, a quiet estrangement grew. People started seeing it differently pretty fast. Yeah, like the public perception sort of caught up. The reviews weren't treating the whole thing as a partnership anymore. Instead, they were saying it was Jerry Lewis and his singer. And that line became this repeated refrain. Instead of a true paired act, Martin got framed as a kind of accessory to Lewis's comedic genius. And for a performer who had climbed up through the clubs, this little downplaying didn't land gently. Martin wasn't someone who usually turned dramatic, but the silence just kind of hid the fact that he was noticing more and more. For Lewis, taking control might have seemed like keeping the act protected or intact, but for Dean it felt like losing or shrinking everything they had built. Offstage, the relationship began cooling as Lewis's influence grew and spread. Martin, he pulled back into quiet observation and private thinking. They both got it. Even if neither of them said it out loud that often, the partnership was moving, and not in a way you could reverse. And it wasn't only ego involved, not fully. It was also their craft, and career philosophies were fundamentally different. Lewis loved constant novelty and the feeling of steering everything, while Martin leaned toward steadiness plus this understated kind of presence. For a while, their collaboration worked because it held a delicate balance between those strengths. But once the balance broke, the whole thing started coming undone. As the creative tensions mounted, the signs of Dean's diminishing presence extended far beyond the script and stage, striking at his very visibility and recognition. The invisible partner. By the mid-50s, Dean Martin was increasingly invisible. On screen, off, and in the eyes of even his closest partner. This invisibility wasn't the result of a single moment, but a slow disappearance from the act's spotlight. In 1954, Look magazine ran a 2-page spread on Martin and Lewis during a film shoot, a feature meant to celebrate their success and remind America why they loved the duo. But the photographs told a troubling story. Jerry Lewis was front and center, dominating every frame with his infectious energy, while Dean Martin was gone, not pushed to a corner or cropped tightly, simply missing. When Dean walked into the dressing room and saw the magazine, Jerry was already laughing at the images. He pointed out to Dean that they had made him look like a giant, a sentiment joyous to Lewis, but painful for Martin. That giant was so imposing only because no one else was there to balance him. Dean's absence was glaring. Yet Lewis didn't seem to grasp the significance of what Dean was witnessing, that he had effectively erased his partner. This was not cruelty born of malice. Cruelty requires intention. What this moment revealed was something subtler but more devastating. Dean Martin had become so invisible to Jerry Lewis that it no longer registered. The partner who shared his stage night after night had become a ghost to him, and that realization was almost impossible to recover from. In a partnership built on trust and mutual dependence, there's no return from one person's erasure by the other. You can work through creative differences or times of tension, but when the other stops seeing you at all, the foundation collapses. Dean Martin reached that painful truth looking at a magazine spread, his physical presence there, but his image absent. Following that moment, their relationship deteriorated further. On the set of their final film, Hollywood or Bust, they barely spoke outside of obligatory lines. Emails and messages were replaced by third-party communication through the director. The joint act they once embodied was now merely contractual obligation. What audiences saw remained a flawless performance, but behind the curtain, the collaboration had ended. Dean never publicized this invisible spiral. He left no memoir or detailed account. Instead, he silently counted the months left on his contract, waiting for it to run out. That quiet endurance, showing up and performing with excellence despite profound personal hurt, speaks to his professionalism and resilience. By the time their partnership officially ended, Dean Martin had made a choice: to leave without public drama, to name the truth in a few measured words, and then to move on. What unfolded afterward would be shaped by that choice, echoing through decades of fame, silence, and complicated legacies. The invisible partner was still there, but the partnership that defined an era was over in every way that truly mattered. Breaking point on set. The final months filming Hollywood or Bust were marked by a slow unraveling that few outside the crew fully understood. By the spring of 1956, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had stopped speaking outside the bare necessities required for shooting. Rather than the lively camaraderie fans had grown to expect, their conversations became clipped exchanges or went through intermediaries, mostly the director, Frank Tashlin. This wasn't the drama of a shouted argument, but a chilling silence that filled every room they shared. At rehearsals, the tension was palpable. Jerry Lewis, known for his spontaneity and control, would sometimes stop a scene mid-action to publicly correct Dean, ordering him to change his line delivery. These corrections weren't suggestions, they were commands issued in front of the entire cast and crew, underlining the power imbalance now pervasive on set. Dean, ever the professional, complied quietly, even though the gesture was humiliating, a man trained to work as a partner being treated like a subordinate. Lewis later reflected on this period in his memoir, written decades later, describing their continued performances as a sad routine. He admitted they were performing together but not really speaking, desperately hoping the rift would heal. Yet deep down, he knew it wouldn't. Dean Martin never shared his side, choosing instead to endure the remaining months with stoic silence, waiting for the contractual obligations to end. The dynamic was no longer about entertainment, but survival. Beyond the stage and camera, the two men were living in parallel worlds. They arrived and rehearsed separately whenever possible, maintaining a physical and emotional distance that extended beyond professional necessity. Their silent coexistence culminated in their final public performance at the Copacabana. In New York, in July 1956, exactly 10 years after their first show together. Audiences cheered, unaware that behind the smiles and applause, the partnership they celebrated had already ended. This final chapter wasn't marked by dramatic walkouts or public confrontations. Instead, it unfolded quietly, a gradual fading of connection that only the two men fully experienced. The contrast between public perception and private reality was stark. Fans saw two performers in perfect sync, while beneath the surface, a partnership was irrevocably broken. Such discipline speaks volumes about their professionalism and dedication, masking a painful farewell with the illusion of harmony. The director, Frank Tashlin, often found himself as the go-between, relaying messages between two men no longer communicating directly. It was a difficult role, mediating between bitterness and resignation, trying to keep the production afloat despite the undercurrents of tension. This fractured collaboration was a shadow of the creative unity that had once propelled their astonishing success. Their final film itself, overshadowed by personal estrangement, became a symbol of what they were leaving behind. They had once dreamed of artistic innovations and shared triumphs, but the reality was a product of contracts and fading mutual respect. For Dean Martin, the decision to move on was already made, even if unspoken, well before the cameras stopped rolling. The breaking point led to a moment of stark honesty. 10 words spoken quietly, but with irreversible impact. Life after the split. After the curtain fell on their decade-long partnership, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis embarked on markedly different paths that defined their solo careers and public lives. Dean Martin evolved into the Rat Pack legend, a television host, and a recording artist whose name alone carried immense weight. Underneath his smooth, confident demeanor, Martin cultivated a career that answered to no one but himself, building a brand far beyond the shadow of any partnership. He rarely commented on Jerry Lewis, often offering only brief responses before moving on, avoiding the media drama entirely. Meanwhile, Jerry Lewis plunged into a fiercely independent career that sought to reclaim control over every aspect of his creative output. Almost immediately after the split, Lewis signed a then-record $10 million deal with Paramount, giving him the resources and authority to direct his own films, write scripts, and shape his on-screen persona. His 1963 film, The Nutty Professor, became a critical and commercial success and established him as a filmmaker of note, especially in Europe, where intellectuals praised his visual style and called him a genius. Yet in America, critical reception remained mixed, and a complicated reputation began to take hold. Reports circulated about Lewis's demanding behavior on set, ranging from micromanaging rewrites to harsh treatment of crew members who made mistakes. Actresses like Karen Sharp later revealed an oppressive environment, describing how Lewis wielded his approval as the only currency that mattered. Those who displeased him found themselves isolated professionally, as Lewis used his influence to silence dissent quietly and effectively. This behind-the-scenes atmosphere presented a stark contrast to Lewis's public image as a warm, humanitarian figure. For over 40 years, Lewis was celebrated for his tireless efforts, raising billions for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, hosting its annual telethon with heartfelt sincerity. Publicly, he appeared warm and deeply moved by the children he helped. But privately, he maintained a tightly controlled world where he dictated not only his career, but the behavior of those around him. This duality, a public benefactor and a private autocrat, shaped much of the latter half of his life. In stark contrast, Dean Martin's life also bore tragedy and tenderness. His eldest son, Dino Martin Jr., died in a military plane crash in 1987 at age 35. Despite their long silence, Jerry Lewis came alone to the funeral, standing unnoticed in the shadows, a gesture of quiet respect, divorced from fanfare or mention. Afterwards, Dean called Lewis, a rare personal moment where they spoke openly for over an hour, shedding tears and admitting the pain and complexity of their shared history. This call underscored how deeply intertwined their lives had remained, despite 2 decades of silence. It was a moment of real reconciliation, unmatched by the staged 1976 reunion orchestrated by Frank Sinatra for television. That hug and laugh were performances by professionals. The phone call was raw, vulnerable, and private, true closure in its own solemn way. Jerry Lewis continued working well into his 80s, gracing films and stages, but the shadow of loneliness lingered. When asked about Dean Martin's passing, Lewis described him as sad and lonely, a judgment that now feels less like observation and more like a haunting echo. Their story is thus not just one of fame and success, but also of emotional isolation and the enduring cost of fractured partnership. The distance between them never fully closed, yet moments of quiet reunion revealed the depth of their unresolved connection. The quiet reconciliations. For two men who had ceased communication for 20 long years, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis found rare, intimate moments of contact that spoke volumes. Far from the glare of cameras and public stages, these reconnections revealed a complicated mixture of forgiveness, sorrow, and the enduring bonds formed in a lifetime of shared triumphs and tragedies. It was during these moments that the human cost of their fractured partnership became most apparent. One such poignant occasion was Jerry Lewis's unannounced visit to Dean Martin's 72nd birthday party at a Las Vegas hotel in 1989. The crowd witnessed an emotionally charged scene as Martin embraced Lewis and declared loudly, "I love you, and I mean it." This public confession was a powerful counterpoint to decades of silence, hinting at unspoken regrets and the complexity beneath their fractured bond. More revealing was the seldom-discussed funeral of Dean's son Dino in 1987. Jerry's quiet attendance, unnoticed by most, showed that beneath professional bitterness lay a layer of loyalty and respect. Standing in the shadows, he made sure not to distract from the family's grief, a humble act amid years of estrangement. When Martin learned of Lewis's presence, he called him that night, opening a line of communication that broke a 20-year silence. Their conversation was raw and unguarded, filled with tears and long pauses. Dean Martin's words, "Life's too short, my friend," carried the weight of finally confronting the past and the losses they both endured. It was not a public performance, but a genuine moment of reconciliation between two old friends who once trusted each other implicitly. Despite these moments, full reconciliation stayed kinda out of reach. It wasn't really there. Their relationship had this back and forth where they both saw the other's pain, yet the years of conflict and misunderstanding left these scars that wouldn't just go away. The big 1976 televised reunion Frank Sinatra put together was, well, more show than heart, like a staged gathering. It gave the public closure, but it still couldn't remove the deeper fractures underneath, not even close. Even later, both of them held different angles on what that partnership meant. Jerry Lewis spent a lot of his life talking openly about their work together, and yes, about regrets too. He tended to frame it almost like a romance, a sort of love story with artistic devotion and some very personal loss mixed in. Dean Martin, on the other hand, kept his usual restraint. He offered barely any commentary about their past, and if there was a reckoning, it stayed more private than public. Those quiet reconciliations, they kind of remind us that even the most spectacular duos can have deep personal struggles beneath all that bright veneer. Friendship and disappointment often end up living together, and forgiveness is usually not neat or complete. These moments, stuck between being estranged and still having affection, make two icons feel more human. Their chemistry once gave joy to millions, but it didn't keep them perfectly safe from all the stuff that comes after. In the end, these small private returns to connection show just how tangled their lives remained, even after decades of silence and separation. Their story isn't only fame and success, it's also enduring complexity. The kind where ties of partnership can bend, but they don't always snap. These glimpses of reconciliation, though imperfect, offer a haunting reflection on the cost and the possibility of healing long after the spotlight fades. Legacy and lessons. The story of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis is a profound illustration of how fame and partnership can both elevate and erode people in equal measure. Their rise was meteoric, crafting a brand of entertainment that resonated across generations. Yet beneath the laughter and applause, the cost of their success was quietly mounting, hidden in decisions made behind closed doors and the slow fading of respect between two men. Their legacy is layered, one of brilliant collaboration overshadowed by a painful unraveling. Dean Martin's decision to leave quietly, with just a few words, shows a remarkable clarity and restraint. He chose to name what he saw with precision, that their partnership had devolved into a commercial product, and that he was no longer valued as a person. This rare decisiveness preserved his dignity, contrasting sharply with Jerry Lewis's decades-long public quest for explanation and understanding. It raises questions about how much silence can say when words are withheld at the right moment. Jerry Lewis remains a complicated figure in this story, gifted, driven, and deeply flawed. His contributions to comedy and philanthropy are indisputable, but so too are the accounts of his controlling behavior and inability to express genuine connection with those closest to him. This complex portrait reminds us that talent and kindness do not always coexist cleanly, and that genius can carry shadows that shape relationships and legacies in unexpected ways. The way both men handled their later years highlights the different ways people respond to loss and change. Dean Martin moved forward, building an independent career and rarely revisiting the past publicly. Jerry Lewis held tightly to the memory of their partnership, revisiting it repeatedly in memoirs and interviews, seeking perhaps to reclaim what had been lost or misunderstood. Their stories underscore that endings are rarely simple, and that healing comes in diverse forms. What really hooks me is the question their story keeps asking you, like deep down, when someone shows you who they actually are, not only in crisis, but in all those everyday little moments too, how long do you keep waiting before you take it as real? Dean Martin seemed to act after about a decade of quiet watching, choosing clarity over denial, kind of just deciding enough is enough. And the sons of Jerry Lewis, well, they had to live with the echoes of their father's contradictions, moving through private pain that sat alongside public quiet. Those personal costs add this heavy weight to the whole tale. Their story also gives this warning look at fame's double edge. Sure, public applause can hide the cracks. They just grow in the background until it's too late to pretend. The magic people think they see on stage and screen often shelters more tangled dynamics, like control, invisibility, and emotional neglect. It pushes the audience to go past charisma and surface success and try to find what's actually happening under the skin. In the end, the legacy of Martin and Lewis isn't only about entertainment history. It's more like a mirror for partnerships of all kinds. In art, in business, in life. That balance of being seen, getting credit, and holding respect together, it's fragile. When one person becomes sidelined or undervalued, the whole relationship gets warped. And Dean Martin's 10 words still land like a steady reminder about truth, plus self-worth, that you can't just trade away. Their collaboration brought joy to millions, but it also left lessons about respect, visibility, and the courage to name difficult truths. If their story moved you, please like and subscribe for more thoughtful explorations of legendary lives and the moments that defined them.